Nero Johnson was 68, a retired train engineer who had spent most of his life guiding heavy locomotives across the country. His hands were steady, his mind sharp, and his voice carried the calm confidence of a man who had seen countless dawns from the front of an engine. But in the quiet years after retirement, something began to change. It started as a dull ache in his thighs after climbing the stairs, then a stiffness in his shoulders that made even lifting a coffee mug feel heavier than it should. He brushed it off as just getting old, the way so many of us do. One morning, Nero woke to find his legs trembling as he tried to stand. It wasn't the normal morning sluggishness, this was weakness that scared him. At the urging of his wife, Margaret, he went to see his doctor. The diagnosis wasn't unexpected: high cholesterol. The doctor's voice was gentle but firm, explaining that this put Nero at serious risk for heart disease and stroke. A prescription for Atorvastatin was handed over, along with reassurances that it was the gold standard for protecting his heart. Nero trusted the advice, the way we all want to trust those in white coats. The first few weeks were uneventful. Nero took his little white pill with breakfast each morning, feeling a quiet relief that he was doing something to protect himself. But slowly, subtle changes began to creep in. He felt more tired than usual, even after a good night's sleep. Climbing the stairs now left him winded. His muscles ached in a way that didn't match his activity level. Margaret noticed he was sitting out of their evening walks more often, choosing instead to rest in his chair by the window. Then came the morning he dropped his coffee mug because his hands felt weak and clumsy. Margaret looked at him with that worried expression only a lifelong partner can give. And for the first time, Nero wondered if the very pill meant to save him was quietly stealing pieces of his strength. It was a quiet, uneasy thought, one he didn't voice right away. How could something prescribed to protect his heart be making the rest of him feel worse? As a doctor who has walked alongside countless patients over the decades, I've seen this moment before, that slow dawning of doubt. Not panic, not anger, just a growing awareness that something isn't quite right. It's in the way a patient hesitates when I ask how they're feeling. It's in the sigh before they say, "I thought it was just me." Nero's story is not unique, but it's deeply personal, and it's the reason we need to talk openly about what medications can do beyond their intended purpose. Over the months that followed, Nero began to keep a small notebook. He wrote down the days his muscles ached more than usual, the mornings his energy felt drained before breakfast, the occasional headaches that appeared out of nowhere. He wasn't looking for trouble, he was looking for patterns. Margaret began helping, quietly keeping track alongside him. What they discovered together was enough to bring them back to my office, notebook in hand, ready to ask the question so many are afraid to. Could this be the medicine? And that's where our journey together begins. Not to frighten you, not to tell you what to do, but to walk with you through the full picture, the parts often left unspoken in the short minutes of a clinic visit. Nero's story is a reminder that your health is not just about lab numbers or prescriptions. It's about how you feel each morning when you open your eyes, the strength in your legs when you stand, and the quiet confidence that your treatment is helping, not quietly hurting. Nero thought he knew his body well. After all, it had carried him through nearly 7 decades of work, travel, and family life without much complaint. But lately, something was off. It wasn't the kind of soreness you get after working in the garden too long or hauling groceries up the stairs. This ache had a way of settling deep into his thighs and shoulders, like an invisible weight pressing down. At first, he brushed it off as lingering fatigue from an unusually long walk he and Margaret had taken one Sunday. But when it lingered for weeks and seemed to grow sharper after each morning pill, he began to take notice. One chilly afternoon, as he reached to take a book from the top shelf, a twinge shot through his upper arm. He froze, hands suspended in midair, waiting for the sharpness to fade. Margaret, ever observant, caught the slight wince on his face. "You've been stiff lately," she said quietly, her tone more concerned than accusatory. He gave her a small smile, muttering something about just getting older. But the truth was gnawing at him. It wasn't just stiffness, it was a heaviness that seemed to sap his strength from within. I remember the day he came back to see me, notebook in hand. He'd been keeping track of his symptoms, not because he suspected anything sinister, but because he wanted to make sense of what his body was telling him. He spoke carefully, not wanting to sound like he was blaming the medication that was meant to protect him. "Doc," he began, "I've been feeling different. My legs don't want to carry me the same way they used to." Is it possible this is connected to that pill? I listened, letting him empty the thoughts he'd been carrying. His voice had that mix of hope and doubt I've heard so often. Hope that I'd reassure him, doubt because he already suspected the truth. I explained gently that yes, some people on Atorvastatin do experience muscle aches, sometimes subtle, sometimes severe. I didn't lecture, didn't quote long studies. Instead, I told him about another patient, a retired school teacher, who described her legs feeling as if she'd run a marathon in her sleep. It helped him see he wasn't alone. I also mentioned that some researchers believe the medicine can lower the body's supply of CoQ10, a small but vital compound that helps muscle cells produce energy. Without enough of it, muscles can feel weak and achy. It wasn't a diagnosis, it was a piece of the puzzle. That night, Nero and Margaret sat at their kitchen table, sipping tea. She asked him what I had said, and he repeated it slowly. They agreed on one thing. They didn't want to rush to stop the medicine, but they wanted to be more aware. Margaret, ever the problem solver, suggested adding more foods rich in CoQ10 to his diet. Salmon, tuna, even a few servings of beef heart if they could find it. Nero chuckled at that last one, imagining Margaret negotiating with the butcher. Still, he agreed to try, not as a cure, but as a small step toward feeling like himself again. The change wasn't immediate, but something shifted in him. Simply having a possible explanation, a name for the ache, gave him back a bit of control. He began to stretch more in the mornings, slowly working out the stiffness before breakfast. He took short walks even on days he didn't feel like it, believing movement might keep the heaviness at bay. And each evening, he noted in his little book whether the ache was better, worse, or the same. Margaret noticed he seemed lighter somehow. The ache was still there, but it no longer hung over him like a cloud he couldn't name. Instead, it was a challenge to navigate, a problem he could face with small, daily choices. That was the first real shift, moving from confusion to cautious awareness. He hadn't solved it, but he'd taken back a measure of control over his own story. It was a Sunday morning, and the kitchen was alive with the smell of fresh coffee and warm toast. Nero settled into his favorite chair with a plate of scrambled eggs, eager for the comfort of a slow breakfast. But halfway through the meal, a faint twist of discomfort stirred in his belly. He ignored it at first, sipping his coffee and turning the page of the newspaper. Yet by the time he stood to take his plate to the sink, the unease had spread, a sour heaviness that clung stubbornly, making him wish he could lie down instead of starting the day. Margaret noticed. She always did. "You've been pushing your plate away more often," she said, not accusing, just observing. Nero shrugged, muttering something about a mild bug going around. But he knew this was different. It wasn't the sharp, sudden pain of bad food or a fleeting upset stomach. This was a slower, quieter intrusion, bloating after even light meals, a faint queasiness that lingered into the afternoon. And lately, he'd been making more trips to the bathroom than usual, sometimes with surprising urgency. When he came to see me again, his notebook was thicker with scribbles. Alongside notes about muscle aches were new entries: queasy after breakfast, loose stools mid-afternoon, avoided dinner, no appetite. He didn't sound alarmed, just puzzled. "Doc," he asked, "could this be my cooking? Or is it that pill again?" I could hear the hesitation in his voice. Nobody likes to suspect the medicine they've been told will save them, but I also knew the pattern. I'd seen it before. I explained that while not everyone experiences it, some people on Atorvastatin notice changes in digestion. The drug works in the liver but passes through the digestive system first, and for some, that journey stirs up trouble. The lining of the gut can be more sensitive during those first weeks or months, leading to nausea, bloating, or changes in bowel habits. It wasn't dangerous in most cases, I assured him, but it could certainly make daily life uncomfortable. Nero didn't want a lecture, he wanted something to hold on to. So I told him one simple truth: the body speaks in whispers before it shouts. And his stomach was whispering now. We agreed on a small change, taking his pill with a little food instead of on an empty stomach, to see if it eased the discomfort. I also suggested he notice if certain meals made things worse, not to avoid them forever, but to understand the patterns. At home, Margaret quietly became his partner in the experiment. She adjusted breakfast so it was lighter on the stomach, a banana and a slice of toast instead of heavy eggs, tea instead of strong coffee. Nero grumbled at first, joking about rabbit food, but the gentle routine began to suit him. He found that when he gave his pill a cushion of food, the queasiness often passed him by. On the days it didn't, he simply rested a bit after meals, no longer fighting it as something to push through. One evening, as they washed dishes together, Margaret asked how he was feeling. He surprised himself by smiling. "Better," he said. "Not perfect, but better." The ache in his muscles was still a quiet companion, but now the knot in his stomach wasn't stealing as much of his day. The small adjustments, the warm tea, the slower breakfasts, weren't cures, but they were a reminder that he could meet these changes halfway. That was the second shift in Nero's journey, from simply enduring discomfort to working with it. It wasn't about blaming the medicine or ignoring its value. It was about accepting that his body was adjusting and that he could make the adjustment a little gentler. Margaret called it listening to the whispers. Nero liked that. It made him feel less like a patient and more like a man still in conversation with his own health. Nero was used to hard work. Years spent operating trains had given him a strong back and a steady spirit. But lately, even rest seemed to betray him. He woke up feeling tired, a heaviness in his limbs that no amount of sleep could shake. The mornings were the worst. Getting out of bed felt like lifting a weight tied around his chest. At first, he told himself it was just the passing of time, the natural slowing down of age. But as days passed, that tiredness seeped into his afternoons and evenings, dulling the sharpness that had once defined him. One afternoon, Margaret found him sitting by the window, eyes half closed, a cup of untouched tea cooling beside him. "You look worn out, Nero," she said softly. He tried to smile, but it felt forced. "I just can't seem to shake this fatigue," he admitted. "It's like my body's battery is always on low." There was vulnerability in his voice that caught Margaret off guard. She had always known him as the pillar of their little home, steady, reliable, never complaining. But now the man who had carried her through decades was visibly struggling. When he came in for a follow-up, Nero laid it all out. The muscle aches were still there, yes, but this fatigue was something new. It wasn't the kind that comes after hard physical labor. It was deeper, a bone-deep sluggishness that made even simple tasks seem daunting. I listened, nodding, understanding that this was more than just tiredness. I explained that while the exact cause isn't fully clear, many people on Atorvastatin report similar feelings. It might be connected to the same processes that affect muscle energy, perhaps involving that little molecule, CoQ10, which helps power cells. But fatigue can also come from the body working harder in unseen ways, adapting to changes in metabolism or dealing with subtle effects in the liver, which processes the medication. It's as if the body is quietly fighting an internal battle, using energy just to keep balance. I didn't want Nero to feel like this was all in his head or that he was simply getting old. This was real, and it deserved attention. Margaret and Nero left the clinic that day with a new plan. It wasn't about stopping the medication, far from it, but Nero needed to listen more carefully to his body's signals. We talked about pacing, how pushing through exhaustion could make things worse, but respecting rest was not weakness. We discussed small lifestyle shifts, adding light, consistent exercise to gently build stamina, focusing on a balanced diet rich in whole foods, and improving sleep hygiene. Nero promised to keep a log, noting good days and bad, energy highs and slumps. Back home, the first few days were difficult. Nero's old habits, rising early and tackling the day head-on, and were hard to break. But with Margaret's quiet encouragement, he started taking short walks in the morning sun, breathing in the cool air and moving at a gentle pace. They both learned the art of patience. He swapped heavy meals for lighter options with plenty of vegetables, nuts, and lean protein. Evenings became quieter affairs, dimming lights early and setting routines that soothed rather than stimulated. One night, as they sat quietly after dinner, Nero confessed he felt a small victory. "I still get tired," he said, "but it doesn't feel like a weight dragging me down all day." Margaret smiled, squeezing his hand. It wasn't a cure, but it was progress, a new rhythm they could live with. This stage marked a vital turning point. Nero wasn't just reacting to symptoms anymore. He was learning to work with them, adjusting his pace and mindset. He wasn't letting fatigue steal his joy, but inviting it to speak in a language he could understand. It was a reminder that health is rarely about perfection. It's about resilience, adaptation, and small wins. The late autumn wind had started to bite, and the Johnson household was settling into the coziness that only this time of year can bring. Yet for Nero, something invisible lingered beneath the warmth of the firelight, a persistent sniffle, a tickle at the back of his throat, a mild congestion that refused to fully clear. It wasn't quite a cold, at least not the kind that sent him to bed with a fever or left him too weak to move. Instead, it was a low-grade nuisance, a shadow of sickness that settled just on the edges of his day. Margaret noticed the slight change immediately. "You sound stuffy," she said one morning as she handed him his usual cup of herbal tea. Nero nodded, wiping his nose discreetly. "It's nothing," he said with a half smile, "just a little something that won't quit." But deep down, he felt the odd frustration of being slowed by something he couldn't quite name. It was as if his body was trying to tell him it was under a subtle kind of siege, one that didn't demand urgent attention but wasn't entirely benign either. When Nero came to see me next, he shared this quietly creeping, cold-like symptom with a trace of worry. He was careful not to jump to conclusions, but wanted to understand if this was connected to his medication. I told him that although Atorvastatin isn't an infection, some patients do report symptoms like nasal congestion, sneezing, or a sore throat that linger longer than expected. It's thought that the medication's effect on inflammation and the immune system might slightly alter how the body responds to everyday viruses, or even mimic symptoms without an actual infection. This subtle immune modulation isn't harmful for most, but it can feel like an uninvited guest who overstays their welcome. I reminded Nero that while these symptoms might seem minor, they can still affect quality of life, especially when they linger alongside other side effects. We talked about simple comforts, staying hydrated, resting when needed, and gently using over-the-counter remedies if necessary. But most importantly, we agreed on vigilance. If symptoms worsened or were accompanied by fever or chest discomfort, he should seek prompt care. Back home, Nero and Margaret treated these days as gentle reminders from his body to slow down. On mornings when congestion made breathing less easy, Nero paused his usual morning walk and sat by the window, watching the world wake slowly. Margaret brewed herbal teas with honey and lemon, the warm cups providing small moments of relief and care. They both came to appreciate that healing isn't always dramatic. Sometimes it's about patience, listening, and accepting the slow rhythms of recovery. That winter, Nero learned a new kind of resilience, one that embraces the imperfect days alongside the good. He found comfort in knowing these minor colds weren't signs of failure or decline, but signals to honor his limits. Margaret often reminded him, even the strongest engines need rest in the cold. And Nero, with a quiet smile, would nod, grateful for the steady companionship that came with love and understanding. The winter had settled deep into the town, and the days were shorter, colder, and quieter. Nero had grown accustomed to the steady rhythm of his life, pacing himself carefully around the aches, fatigue, and those lingering colds. But one morning, everything changed. He woke feeling unusually weak, his muscles not just sore, but trembling under the weight of even simple movements. When he tried to get out of bed, a sharp pain shot through his thighs, and he noticed his urine was darker than usual, the color of strong tea. Panic flickered briefly in Nero's mind. He called Margaret, whose calm voice instantly soothed some of the fear. "We need to get you to the doctor," she said firmly. Nero didn't argue. This was different. This was urgent. At the clinic, I met Nero with concern, but also reassurance. What he was describing sounded like rhabdomyolysis, a rare but serious side effect where muscle tissue breaks down rapidly, releasing harmful proteins into the bloodstream. These proteins can overwhelm the kidneys and cause damage if not treated promptly. It was the moment when the quiet whispers his body had been sending became a loud alarm. I saw in Nero's eyes the weight of that realization, that the medication meant to protect his heart had also brought this dangerous risk. He wasn't angry or defeated, he was thoughtful, ready to face the challenge head-on. We began immediate treatment, closely monitoring his kidney function and muscle enzymes. The road ahead was uncertain, but urgent. Margaret stayed by his side, holding his hand through hospital visits and tests. Their conversations turned toward hope and determination. "We'll get through this," she said softly one evening. "We'll find the balance, protecting your heart without sacrificing the rest." Nero nodded, grateful for her unwavering strength. This phase marked a profound shift in Nero's journey. It wasn't just about enduring symptoms anymore. It was about making difficult decisions with his healthcare team, adjusting medication doses, exploring alternatives, and embracing lifestyle changes with renewed focus. He began to understand that health is a delicate balance, a negotiation between risks and benefits that requires vigilance and courage. Nero's story is a reminder that no medicine is without potential harm, but with informed awareness and open communication, those risks can be managed. It's a call to listen deeply to the signals our bodies send and to work closely with trusted healthcare partners in navigating the complex terrain of treatment. After the scare with his muscles and kidneys, Nero's life took on a new focus. The days were no longer just about managing symptoms, but about understanding every piece of the puzzle, including things he'd never imagined mattered so much. One afternoon, while sitting with Margaret and our nurse, Nero learned about something that surprised him deeply: how the medicines and even the foods he loved could interact, sometimes in ways that made side effects worse. He had always enjoyed his morning grapefruit juice, a ritual stretching back years. But now, I explained gently, grapefruit and certain medications don't get along well. Grapefruit inhibits an enzyme in the liver called CYP3A4, which helps break down atorvastatin. When this enzyme is blocked, the medication can build up in the bloodstream, increasing the risk of muscle damage and other side effects. It was a small change with big implications. Nero listened intently, picturing how his daily habits, what felt routine and harmless, could tip the balance of his health. It wasn't about giving up the pleasures of life, but about making informed choices. Margaret joked that they'd find new morning rituals to replace the grapefruit juice, perhaps a fresh berry smoothie instead. We also discussed other medications Nero took for unrelated issues and how they might affect atorvastatin levels. This was new territory, a reminder that no health journey is isolated. Everything interacts: medicines, diet, lifestyle, creating a delicate ecosystem in the body. Armed with this knowledge, Nero became more proactive. He compiled a list of all his medicines and supplements and shared it openly with every healthcare provider he saw. He asked questions, sought clarity, and refused to stay passive in his care. This change in mindset, from passive patient to engaged partner, was perhaps the most significant transformation of all. Margaret saw this shift clearly. "You're not just surviving this," she said one evening, "you're learning to live well with it." Nero smiled, feeling a quiet pride. His journey was far from over, but he was no longer overwhelmed by fear or confusion. Instead, he moved forward with hope, equipped not only with medicine, but with understanding. And that is the heart of the story, knowing that medications like atorvastatin are powerful tools, but also require respect, vigilance, and partnership. Nero's experience teaches us that health is not just what happens in the doctor's office or pharmacy, but in the choices we make every day, in the conversations we hold, and in the quiet moments when we listen to our own bodies. As the seasons shifted from winter to spring, Nero found himself in a new rhythm, not just physically but emotionally. The journey with atorvastatin had been challenging, filled with unexpected twists and moments of doubt. Yet, through it all, he discovered something far more valuable than perfect health: a deep partnership with his doctors, with Margaret, and most importantly, with himself. One afternoon, while sitting in the sunlit garden with a cup of chamomile tea, Nero reflected on how far he'd come. He remembered the early days of uncertainty, the aches, the fatigue, the quiet colds that seemed to linger, and how overwhelming it all had felt. But now he approached his health with a calm confidence. He knew the signs his body gave him, and he wasn't afraid to speak up. He trusted his medical team, and together they crafted a plan that balanced the benefits of medication with careful attention to side effects. Margaret smiled as she watched him stretch gently before their evening walk. "You look lighter," she said, "like you're carrying less than before." Nero chuckled softly. "I guess I am, not just in body, but in mind. This whole experience taught me to listen, to really listen, and to take care of all parts of myself, not just the cholesterol numbers." Their bond grew stronger through this shared journey. They celebrated small victories: a day without muscle pain, a meal enjoyed without stomach upset, an afternoon walk where energy felt almost like it used to. These moments weren't grand or dramatic, but they were deeply meaningful. For Nero, they represented hope and resilience. I see many patients like Nero, people who face the complexities of medications with courage and grace. What stands out most is their willingness to partner in their own care, to ask questions, to notice the whispers of their bodies, and to advocate for themselves. That's the true heart of healing. Nero's story reminds us all that medicine is just one part of health. It's a tool, powerful yet imperfect. The rest is our daily choices, our relationships, and the compassion we extend to ourselves when the road gets hard. With knowledge, patience, and partnership, we can navigate even the toughest challenges with dignity. As you watch this, I invite you to think about your own journey. Are you listening to the subtle messages your body sends? Are you comfortable speaking openly with your healthcare team? Remember, you are the most important member of that team. Nero's experience with atorvastatin had reshaped not just his health, but his outlook on life. He understood now that aging brought challenges, not all preventable, some unexpected, but also opportunities to grow wiser and more compassionate with himself. It wasn't about chasing perfection, but about embracing the journey with its ups and downs. One afternoon, while sitting with Margaret watching the sunset, Nero shared a thought that had settled deep in his heart. "I used to think medicine was a magic fix," he said softly, "something you take and forget about. But now I see it's part of a bigger story, my story. It's about balance, care, and being present for myself every day." Margaret reached for his hand, their fingers intertwining naturally. "We're in this together," she said. "Whatever comes, we face it side by side." That simple reassurance wrapped around Nero like a warm blanket, grounding him in a sense of peace and partnership. In the months that followed, Nero became more attuned to his body's rhythms. He learned to celebrate the good days and navigate the tough ones with patience. He found joy in small moments, a brisk walk, a favorite song, the laughter of family. These became the markers of health that medicine alone couldn't measure. His relationship with his healthcare providers deepened too. Nero no longer felt like a passive recipient of treatment, but an active partner, asking questions, sharing concerns, and making informed decisions together. This shift gave him a renewed sense of control and confidence. Nero's story is a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the importance of holistic care. It reminds us that medications like atorvastatin are tools, important, effective, but not infallible. True wellness comes from blending these tools with awareness, compassion, and connection. As you reflect on Nero's journey, consider your own. What steps can you take to listen more closely to your body? How might you strengthen your partnerships with loved ones and healthcare teams to navigate your path with greater peace? Remember, you are not alone, and every step you take toward understanding and care matters. As Nero's journey unfolded, one lesson stood out above all: the power of awareness. It was this awareness of his body's signals, of the medication's effects, and of his own limits that transformed his experience from one of uncertainty to one of empowerment. He came to see that listening to oneself is not a sign of weakness, but of strength. One afternoon, during a routine visit, Nero shared how he had started keeping a health journal. It wasn't just about tracking symptoms, but also about noting moods, energy levels, and even moments of joy or frustration. This simple act became a tool of advocacy. It allowed him to communicate more clearly with his doctors, ensuring that decisions about his care were made with a full picture in mind. Margaret watched this change with quiet pride. The man who had once quietly endured discomfort was now an active participant in his health, unafraid to ask questions and seek second opinions. "It's like he's found his voice," she said to me one day, "and it's made all the difference." This shift is what many patients discover over time, that health is a conversation, not a prescription. It's about partnering with medical professionals, family, and oneself to navigate the complex landscape of treatment and well-being. Nero's story also highlights the importance of education and open dialogue. Understanding the potential side effects of medications like atorvastatin allows patients to be vigilant, catch warning signs early, and make informed choices. It breaks down the fear of the unknown, replacing it with clarity and confidence. As you listen to Nero's experience, I encourage you to embrace this mindset. Become your own health advocate. Keep track of how you feel, communicate openly with your healthcare team, and never hesitate to seek clarity. Your health journey is unique, and your voice matters. Nero's journey with atorvastatin was more than a story about medicine. It became a story about life. Despite the challenges he faced, the aches, the fatigue, the fears, he learned that his quality of life was something he could shape every day. Taking a pill was just one part of a much larger picture. One spring morning, as the garden bloomed around their home, Nero and Margaret sat outside watching the birds. He breathed deeply, feeling the sun warm his face, and smiled. "I may not be perfect, but I'm still here," he said softly. "Still learning, still moving forward." That simple acceptance brought him peace. Together, they embraced healthy habits that supported more than just cholesterol numbers. Fresh, colorful foods filled their plates, rich in antioxidants and nutrients to nourish Nero's body and mind. Light exercise became a daily ritual, not a chore, but a celebration of what his body could do. They prioritized rest, connection with family, and moments of joy. Nero also found comfort in sharing his story, hoping it might help others who felt lost or overwhelmed. He spoke openly about his fears and triumphs, reminding friends and neighbors that medication is a tool, not a cure-all. The real power lies in understanding, patience, and partnership. His relationship with his healthcare team remained strong, grounded in honesty and mutual respect. Together, they adjusted treatments as needed, always weighing benefits against side effects. Nero felt heard, cared for, and empowered. This final part of his journey is a reminder that while medications like Atorvastatin play a critical role, they do not define us. Our lives, our well-being, and our happiness are shaped by the choices we make every day. The food we eat, the people we love, and the attention we pay to our body's subtle messages. As you consider Nero's story, may it inspire you to live fully, beyond the medication, beyond the worries, embracing each day with courage and hope. Nero's journey through the challenges of taking Atorvastatin reveals two powerful transformations. First, he moved from confusion and silent suffering to awareness, learning to listen closely to his body's subtle signals and acknowledge the aches, fatigue, and other side effects rather than dismissing them. Second, he shifted from passivity to partnership, becoming an active advocate for his own health by communicating openly with his healthcare team, adjusting habits, and embracing lifestyle changes that supported his well-being beyond just the medication. As you reflect on Nero's story, consider your own relationship with your health. Are you truly listening when your body sends you quiet messages? Are you engaging in honest conversations with those who care for you? Small steps, like tracking your symptoms, asking questions, or making gentle changes to your routine, can create profound shifts in how you feel and manage your health. Remember, health is not just about numbers on a chart or pills in a bottle. It is a daily practice of attention, kindness, and courage. You hold more power than you may realize to shape your journey. So today, take a moment to pause and listen to your body, your mind, and your heart. Let Nero's story inspire you to become your own health partner, making choices with both wisdom and compassion. No matter the challenges ahead, there is always hope. And with awareness and care, every step forward is a step toward a fuller, brighter life.